Okay, going back to our main idea, which is the main topic is Islamic knowledge. And we have talked so far about philosophy, kalam, aqaid, tafsir, tadabbur, and ta'wil of the Quran. And now one important part of that, which is the hadith. And I just share this PowerPoint and the slides with you, inshallah. We will continue our topic. So, didn't we have any homework, any questions that we were supposed to discuss tonight, or to be talking about that before going to our main topic? Yes? All right. So let's go and finish the knowledge of hadith tonight. Everybody can see the slide? Okay. So we had the Islamic knowledge course, knowledge of hadith. We had the definition. And yes. The knowledge of hadith is knowledge by which the words, deeds, and narrations, qawl, fi'al, and taqrir al-ma'soom is about to understood. It is the second actually source for the jurisprudent and the person who is going to derive and get the ahkam of sharia from them. The first of them is the Quran. The second of them is the hadith. We already talked about its importance. We already talked about the contradictions. When there are contradictions between the Quran and hadith, we shall refer to Quran. And sometimes the contradictions are in the form of generality and specificity, meaning that some ayat al-Quran are talking in general terms. Like, for example, Quran says, Aqimus Salah, but other hadith, the words of hadith is going to specifically mention how we're going to say Salah. Aqimus Salah is the general term, is the absolute order and command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but how we shall say Salat, what is the strategy, what is the tactic, what is the actually how one person is going to operate it is not mentioned in the Quran. So hadith is going to say that. So the relation between the ayat and a hadith sometimes is the relation between a general and a specific thing. We call it mutlaq and muqayyad. We call it am and khas. This is it. Categories are the narration of hadith and knowledge of hadith, dirayatul hadith, and the second of them, and the riwayatul hadith. We already talked about them. History previously was known as a branch of hadith, but nowadays in the modern world, in the modern times, it is a branch, a new branch, a separate branch that is talked in itself and separately is enumerated as an independent branch of knowledge, history. The main motivator of gathering and transmitting and accumulating, or better to say, memorizing the ahadith was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Compilation of hadith between the Shiites and Sunnis. Shiites were the first ones who, after the Prophet, started gathering the ahadith, but the Sunnis, because of two reasons, are a little bit, not a little bit, more than a little bit behind the Shias. What are the reasons? What are they? One is that their hands are empty from the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They don't have, they just have a very short amount of ahadith, a very small amount of ahadith related to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam only, but not from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So Shia has Prophet's hadith and Ahlul Bayt's hadith. Ahlul Bayt is the explaining people of the Quran, Quran al-Kareem. This is one reason that the sources of Sunni hadith, I mean, the hadith works of Sunnis are a little bit constrained, or a little bit limited, more than a little bit actually, because they did not have the Ahlul Bayt, and they're not referring to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So our hands is much fuller, is much comprehensive in terms of hadith. The second reason that Sunni sources are weak in this term is that they did not start gathering the ahadith after the Prophet Muhammad, even after the caliphs, till the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the just and a little bit a cosmopolitan, better to say, son of the second caliph, who was a good caliph, and he let the ahadith be compiled by the followers of Ahlul Bayt, by the followers of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the other service that he did, another good job he did for the Muslim Ummah, was that he stopped, he banned, and he commanded to forbid cursing Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam in mosques. Was started by Muawiyah. Compilation of hadith. The compilation of hadith by Ahlul Bayt and their followers had begun a century before the Sunnis. Up to here, just talked. The compilation of hadith by the Ahlul Bayt and their followers had begun a century before the Sunnis, and continued during the time of the Imamat of Hazrat Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. So there's nothing actually very much important here. So 1 century before the Sunnis, it's a long time. I mean, 100 years later, after Shias started gathering and compiling a hadith, 100 years later, Sunnis started. This is another witness and evidence that proves Sunnis cannot claim a lot in terms of hadith. You know, the only 2 books are the main books of them: Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Muslim, and Ibn Majah, of course, these 3 books. And many of the ahadith that are gathered in these 2 books are just from the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, some ahadith from, for example, Khalifa, the first Khalifa, the second Khalifa, Aisha, who are not authentic, actually, authentic people in Shia's perspective. So we cannot consider them as authentic hadith. Furthermore, even if we believe that they are authentic, even at that time, then the number of hadith cannot rival the hadith of Shia in terms of quantity, in terms of quality. In terms of quantity, we mean the number of hadith. In the following slides, I will tell you that 4,000 people were at the time of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, they were narrating hadith from them. Thousands of ahadith were gathered. And if I just mention to you the number of the books, Shia books, only for example, Bahar al-Anwar, 110 pages from Allama Majlisi is gathered, the ahadith of the Shia. You see, it's a great rival, it's a great opponent against the Sunni sources. I mean, it's not comparable actually at all, not at all. The Shia, only 1 book, 1 series of books in the Shia source is called Bahar al-Anwar. I'm just going to tell you, inshallah, in the following slides. And it is about 110 pages. We have also Wasa'il al-Shia, we have also Usul al-Kafi. Then many ahadith are not depicted in that, but are depicted in Usul al-Kafi. Many of them are not in Usul al-Kafi, but depicted in Bahar al-Anwar and Wasa'il al-Shia. So, but what about Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih al-Muslim? How many It is like, for example, we can say you have made a country, okay? You have started a political system in one country, and that's a big country. You're going to cover all the aspects of people's lives in that country. But you have only 10 codes of laws, 10 codes. What Jews and Christians say, especially the Jews, about the 10 commandments of Moses. Those 10 commandments of Moses, they believe are enough, When you just design a computer, you must have thousands of laws, codes of laws. But that is too ridiculous and hilarious when you talk about the rules of creation. When you talk about a computer system in relation of the system of the universe, you say a computer must have thousands of laws, codes of laws, which are just written in help and support of Windows, which are written in Microsoft.com. And Bill Gates, with his followers and his companies, has made a lot, thousands of laws. But when it's the time to speak about the religion, which is the law of creation, the law of the creation, the whole system of the universe and the system of man, okay, they say those 10 commandments is enough. And among the Sunni brothers, they say Hasbuna Kitab Allah. Hasbuna Kitab Allah, the very word that the second Khalifa said when Prophet Muhammad was going to pass away. He said, bring me pen and paper so I just write for you, lest you're going to be misled after me. What was he going to write? He was going to write about Amir al-Mu'min alayhi salam. He knew that he is going to write about what? He's going to remind all the people about the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'minin. That was why he said, Hasbuna Kitab Allah. The book is enough for us. And everybody knows that book is not enough for us. Quran is not enough for us. We already talked about that. And he said, Inna ar-rajula la yahjur. Inna ar-rajula la yahjur. He is sick now. He is on the verge of death. The second Khalifa said, addressing Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this man is on the verge of death and he doesn't know what he's saying. He's out of mind, God forbid. You see? This is a big problem. This is a big mistake. And you see nowadays they face a lot of problems. The words of rationality are very weak, are very subordinate. The words of Hadith is very subordinate and very primitive in the world of Sunnah. And reference to the Quran is very weak, just the superficial aspects of the Quran. So how can you anticipate Sunnah? By Sunnah we mean the legal terms, the codes, and the laws and the rules that are depicted in the books of brothers of Ahl Sunnah solve the issues of humanity in the world. In terms of policy, in terms of politics, in terms of society, in terms of perfection, helping one person reach to the path of perfection and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you don't have these sources, when you don't have rationality, when you don't have a large mass of ahadith, which are the principles of man's life, of man's itinerary, of man's instruction for life, when you don't have them, when you have a superficial approach towards Quran, then how do you anticipate to be able to solve the people's issue in the world? That is why you see more than 2/3 of the people, Muslim Ummah, are Sunnis, but they are not solving any issue for the Muslim Ummah. What have they done for the Islamic world? Nothing. to be honest. But maybe you have 1% Shia in one community. If you just refer to Tanzania, for example, among the Khoja communities, they are 1% Shia. They have the full control in that country. They have the full control over the Islamic affairs in that country. In times of Muharram, for example, they have majalis, they have processions on the streets. Just 1% Shia among the Khoja communities. That is because their hands are not full in terms of Hadith, which are the principles of ruling one community through those principles. So this is another actually sign and witness and evidence that proves that Sunnis cannot do rival acts against the Shia sources, and their hands actually are not that much full in terms of Hadith. Hadith books of Ahl al-Bayt. Among the Ahadith, we have two categories. One category of the Ahadith are compiled by the Ahl al-Bayt themselves. The other are compiled, the books, in terms of books. The other are compiled by the followers of Ahl al-Bayt and the followers of the followers, the companions and the followers of the companions. We call them Sahaba and Tabi'een. The Sahaba of Amir al-Mu'minin, the Sahaba of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they gathered the Ahadith. So Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam were the first people who started gathering Ahadith after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prophet Muhammad's mission was what? Somebody might call, didn't Prophet Muhammad start compiling the Ahadith? We say, no, his mission was not this. His mission was to compile Quran. His main mission was this. Though he said Ahadith, and many people wrote Ahadith too, but he did not start compiling Ahadith himself. He compiled the Quran, and we have proofs that Quran was compiled in the way that is today in the time of Prophet Muhammad, not in the time of Uthman. So many people believe that it was compiled at the time of Umar or Uthman or the time of Amir al-Mu'minin. No. Prophet Muhammad himself gathered Quran in the way that it is right now, the Quran. And the sign, for example, is this. The very ayah that says in Surah Baqarah, the beginning of the surah, that says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلنَّاسِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says this is a kitab. In the form of a kitab it is. In the form of a mushaf it is. So it should be like that at the beginning. So Prophet Muhammad himself ordered and commanded. The second also sign, the second also evidence and argument is that, is it logical to say that Prophet Muhammad is just receiving the words from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and he's not compiling them? Just in different and separate sheets he has prepared them and he distributes them among the people, these sheets, and he never cares about that. He's not wise enough, God forbid. He's not wise enough to actually order and command his followers not only memorize the ayat al-Quran, but also gather them in the form of a book. It's so funny to say that Prophet was like this. He never cared about that. And he let this for the other people to come and make it as a book. You know what I'm saying? Is that clear? That is why, through two logical terms, one scriptural, the other logical and rational, we must believe that it was gathered in the form of the book, Quran. So this was the mission of Prophet Muhammad. The mission of Amir al-Mu'minin, we can say, look at this one, Hadith books of Ahl al-Bayt. The first book of Hadith was written by Hazrat Amir al-Mu'minin Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was with the Imams, and this book was with the Imams and is in the hands of Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam right now. That's a special book. And sometimes the hadith was quoted from it. Special Quran and a special book of hadith is in the hands of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Say the ahkam, say many things from that book. The Mus'haf of Fatima al-Zahra is another book in hadith written by Ma'soom. That is another book, Mus'haf of Fatima salamullah alayha. That is in the hand of Imam Zaman al-Rahna al-Bida right now. It can be said that Jibreel, after the demise of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu descended to the heart of Fatima al-Zahra salamullah alayha because she was so sorrowful. Jibreel came and gave news about the future of his descendants, of her descendants. And he was telling what's going to happen in the future, maybe today, thousands of years later. And by this news, by the glad tidings, Jibreel was making the heart of Fatima al-Zahra happier, a little bit happier. And it was written in the form of Mus'haf Fatima al-Zahra salamullah alayha. On the second level, the book which is narrated from the Shiites, narrated by each class, is the Sahifatu Sajjadiyya. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, because of the time he was in the times of hard and difficult boycotts. I mean, the Umayyads had boycotted Imam Sajjad alayhi salam in educating and training Sorry, I was disconnected. Can you hear me, sisters? Okay. So where were we? Thank you. Okay. Now, here we were. So the Mus'haf of Fatima Zahra and the Mus'haf of Ali, there are two books. There are two separate books, and it shows that the starting point, the initiating point of gathering and compiling hadith was done by Amir al-Mu'minin and Fatima Zahra salamullah alayha, and it continued to the other ai. So Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, for the guidance of people, look at the sequence. The sequence is this. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, for the guidance of people, sends words. The words are revealed to the heart of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his immaculate household. Then if there are the people who compile the words, they compile. If not, Prophet himself will compile. Okay? And as there were some people who compiled the ayat al-Quran and the ahadith of Prophet Muhammad did not do that. He spent his time on real type of propagation, spending time in promoting and spreading the knowledge of Islam by training and educating the people. So different strategies. It's not fair that the Prophet himself start compiling the ahadith. This is so important. I was just having a class today. I just told to the brothers that it's not fair that the followers of Ahlul Bayt, the followers of the prophets, look at here, the prophets of Ahlul Bayt, the companions and the disciples of Ahlul Bayt, okay, let them go at the front, let them do cheap jobs, subordinate jobs, okay? They will do that at the time of Prophet Muhammad because the Muslim Ummah were low in quantity, they were low in number, few in numbers, then Prophet Muhammad had to go into the battlefield. Though he was not standing at the front, he was behind. But that was not right. We have to keep the life of the Prophet safe. We have to keep the time of the Prophet safe. The life of the Prophet and the time of Prophet. It's not fair that you say, okay, Prophet, you yourself go and write the book. Prophet has very important jobs. But as it is so important, if other people do not initiate and start compiling the ahadith of the Prophet, do not write and memorize the ayat al-Quran the way that the Prophet had ordered them, Prophet has to himself do this. Prophet has to do this himself. There were no people. There were no people at the time of prophets, at the time of Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, to write the ahadith. It was banned, it was forbidden. So Amir al-Mu'minin himself started compiling them because that is so important. That is an heir, H-E-I-R. That is a heritage for Muslim Ummah. That is why he started writing that for the use of the Ummah in the hands of other Ahlul Bayt and in the hands of their children. Imam al-Hassan, Imam al-Hussein, they referred to these books several times in order to give the ahkam to the other people. Mus'haf of Fatima, the same. Through the Mus'haf of Fatima Zahra, Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam foretold many things. It is written in the Mus'haf of Fatima Zahra salam alayha. Till the time, it was at the time of Sadiqeen alayhi salam, Sadiqeen, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. When there are students who compile the ahadith, again, likewise the time of Prophet Muhammad sallam, they do not do this themselves. Their students compile. They just release the words. They just release the words. It is so rational to say that, okay, I say the hadith in one session, and another session I go and write it to keep it safe for the other people in the future. So my time actually is wasted somewhat. What do I mean is this, that I have to spend 1 hour for speaking, 1 hour for writing, when I can just do other things, other useful and profitable things in that 1 hour again. Then why should I just spend writing? When somebody else can write it, why doesn't he write? The students can write them. 4,000 students started writing and depicting and narrating the ahadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. That is why the propagation and the promotion of Muslim ummah, of Muslim literature, becomes so high in the times of Imam al-Sadiq and Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. The students and the pupils are doing this job. So by this, it doesn't mean that they are just the carriers of the ahadith. They are just, I don't know, the writers. No, when somebody is writing the hadith, the knowledgeable works, the knowledgeable ideas of one imam, of one scholar, it is as if he is strengthening himself too. He is or she is strengthening his own idea, his own heart too. Not only this, he is giving service to the Muslim ummah for the future. For the future. The second level, look at the second paragraph, sisters. On the second level, the book which is narrated from the Shiites and narrated by each class is the Sahifat al-Sajjadiyya of Imam Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, known as the Psalms of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Zabur al-Muhammad. Zabur, Psalms is the book of David, because it is written and depicted in that the supplications, just like the Psalms of David alayhi salam, Prophet Dawud alayhi salam. It is the Psalms of Muhammad, Sahifat al-Sajjadiyya. Early Shia narrators. After the Imams, we refer to the Shia hadith narrators. They are Abu Rafi', who has started writing Sunan, Ahkam, and Qadaya. I have not just depicted the Qadaya here, propositions. By Qadaya, I meant propositions. And we have Salman al-Farsi. Salman al-Farsi, who was an Iranian. He started writing Athar, the book Athar, relics. The third class are the Abu Dhar Ghaffari, you know him. Asbagh ibn Nabata, these are the hadith narrators. Ubaydullah ibn Abi Rafi', Harith ibn Abdullah, Rabi'at ibn Samir, Sulaym ibn Qais Hilali, Sulaym ibn Qais, which his book, you know his book? Somebody knows his book? He has a very famous book, Sulaym ibn Qais, the first book that is written in tribute to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and what has happened to Fatima al-Zahra, to Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. It's a very authentic book that I suppose Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam has confirmed and has approved this book too. Do you know about it or not? What is the book of Sulaym ibn Qais Hilali? Asrar Ali Muhammad, the secrets of Ali Muhammad. You can just refer to that book. I have not seen the English translation. Maybe there is, because that's the oldest book. That's the oldest historical book. That, of course, we said that history is actually enumerated as a hadithi book. The history of what has happened to Amir al-Mu'minin, to Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it is the oldest book in terms of hadith and history of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. The name is Asrar al Muhammad, the secrets of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, by Sulaym ibn Qais Hilali. Some people say this book is not authentic, but I do not believe in that. Okay, I have asked some scholars. They believe that this book is very authentic. And the words of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam in its tribute in approving this book are totally right. We have also Maysam Tammar. We have Ubaidullah ibn Hurr Juhfi. We have Muhammad ibn Qais Bajali. And Ya'al ibn Marrah are among the first class authors in the science of Hadith. This is it. We refer to the next slide. The era of Imam Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is the illuminating time. Is the illuminating time of Islamic hadith and Islamic literature. Just you read this part from the first half of the 2nd century. That is, in the era of Imam Baqir alayhi salam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the Shiites enjoyed relative freedom. Relative freedom. And it was a philosophy. There was a philosophy behind it. Why the Abbasid caliphs actually let the Shiites be a little bit easier and have freedom in terms of hadith, in terms of knowledge. They had to do this. It was at the beginning of caliphate of Abbasids, and they had to let other people trust them. One of the ways that people could trust them was that Abbasid lets Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, the Imams of the Shia, have more freedom. So they gave more opportunities to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in order to gain more power. And Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam did not abuse. They use it in its best way. They started educating and training students and pupils. They had discussions and debates with the leaders of other sects, like the atheists, the agnostics were there. Actually, they were having discussions. That was why the knowledge with this conflict of ideas. When there are conflict of ideas, the knowledge can increase. If there is not any conflict, if there is not any difference in ideas, then knowledge will not increase. Like the two layers of earth. When they collide, when they face, there is what? There is the mountain that emerges from the ground, from the earth. The emerging of the mountains is the product of the collision of the two layers of earth. That is the same about knowledge. When there is one negative knowledge facing one positive knowledge, there is a collision, and new knowledge raises here and emerges. So, in the era of Imam Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the Shiites enjoyed relative freedom, and the transmission, narration, recording, transmission, naql, narration, riwayah, recording, dhabt, and writing, kitaba. These four. Try to memorize them. Transmission, naql. Narration means riwayah. Recording means dhabt. Recording in their minds, in their hearts, whatever. And writing on the pieces of paper. These four of hadith reached its peak when, this is a key word, when, in times of Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, 4,000 trusted people have narrated from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in this period, and 400 books of hadith, which is called Usul Arba'un Mi'ah. 400 books of hadith in the principles were written in this period. That's not a very small amount of hadith. 400 books of hadith in the principles, just not in details, were written in this period, which is known as the four principles. Usul al-Arba'un Mi'ah, 400 books that are known as the source of narration books. This book, this idea actually is so important, this phrase, four principle, which is the Usul Arba'un Mi'ah. Now, for the last point, point, we'd better refer to the comprehensive Shiite Hadith book. So Prophet started compiling the Quran and saying Hadith, and his followers and companions were writing them. After that, Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Fatima al-Zahra started compiling a Hadith and writing them. After that, Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam himself, Imam al-Sajjad, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. After that, the companions of Ahlul Bayt, like for example, Asbagh ibn Nabata, Abu Dharr Ghafari, Salman al-Farsi, Abu Rafi, all of them, who are the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and we have the companions of the companions. We have the followers of the companions. Who are they? They are these ones. The last series of books, which are now in our hands, and we refer to those books. These books are purified from the wrong hadith, basically, mostly. You know, for example, when we say al-Kafi, when we refer to Usul al-Kafi or Furu al-Kafi, these books, or this book actually, Sheikh Kulayni, Allama Kulayni, Fiqatul Islam Kulayni, has gathered, he has tried, better to say, he has tried to compile the authentic hadith by purification. He has purified the other books previous than him in order to compile a hadith in a book named Usul al-Kafi, which the ahadith are basically pure, are basically correct and authentic. This is the job of al-Kafi. So it's a very systematic job. It's a very knowledgeable job. They had the concern to gather and compile the ahadith that are right to say to the people. You know, if you say a hadith wrongly, you say the hadith wrongly, what type of an effect it will have on the minds of the people. One wrong hadith might change the life of one person generally and specifically. One wrong hadith might change the destiny and the life of one community forever. You can say it. Like, for example, about Ahmad al-Hassan Yamani, we have this fake sect of Shiism. He calls himself Shia, but he's just having maneuver on one hadith. He's just working on one hadith, claiming on one hadith that we have the 13th Mahdi, for example. One hadith. He's justifying it for himself, for the sake of himself, actually, okay? He says, for example, I'm the 13th Mahdi. One hadith changes the life of the whole community because they believe it is connected to Imam, while it is not really. While in reality it is not connected. It is the hadith that Abu Huraira drew it out of his pocket. Al-Kafi, these are the hadith, these are the four, we have four authentic books among the Shias that are among the best types of hadith narrations and hadith compilations. The first of them is this, Al-Kafi by Fiqatul Islam Kulayni. Try to memorize them, okay? Al-Kafi, Fiqatul Islam Kulayni, Sheikh Kulayni they call it. 329 AH, Arab date, it was Hijri, after Hijrah. 329. For example, Imam Zaman alayhi salam was born in 255 AH. Sheikh Kulayni died in 329 AH. That is why maybe Imam Zaman alayhi salam has seen the book of Al-Kafi. That is why there is a hadith that Imam Zaman alayhi salam said, Al-Kafi kafin li shi'atina. For that time, of course, not for this time. Imam Zaman at that time said, Kafi, Usul al-Kafi is sufficient for our Shia. Some people say this hadith is right, this word is right, some people say not. Anyhow, it is type of an authentic book for us, for the Shias. Another, Man la yahduruhu al-faqih. So, first of them, Al-Kafi. The second of them, Man la yahduruhu al-faqih. They call it in abbreviation, man la yahdhur. They call it shortly, man la yahdhur, man la yahdhur. Man la yahdhuruhu al-faqih by Sheikh Saduq. This is another book, 381. Tahdhib al-ahkam, at-tahdhib. They call it at-tahdhib or istibsar and istibsar, 2 books by Sheikh Tusi. 3. Bahar al-Anwar al-Majlisi. Bahar al-Anwar by Allama Majlisi, the 4 books. Wafi Faiz Kashani. Wasa'il al-Shia, Sheikh Hurra-Amali. Most of the ahkam that the maraji' drag and derive from the book is from this book. Most of the ahkam, the Islamic rulings, are from the Wasa'il al-Shia. Sheikh Hurra-Amali, who's actually grave and tomb is in the holy shrine of Imam Reza. If you just come to Haram Mashhad al-Muqaddas, inshallah, if you come to Sahn Ismail Tala, Sahn Inqilab, if you refer there, there is a small room in the northern part of the holy shrine of that courtyard, Inqilab courtyard. There is a small room. It is the burying place and the graveyard of Sheikh Hurra-Amali, who is the owner of Wasa'il al-Shia, Mustadrak al-Wasa'il by Allama Nuri. But the main 4 of them are these: Al-Kafi, Man la yahdhur, At-Tahdhib, Wa Istibsar, and Bahar al-Anwar. These 4 books are among the main authentic books among the Shia. But this does not mean that it has reached to its end, to its final destination. No, no, no. Still, ulama al-Shia must work on the hadith to purify, meaning separating the wrong hadith from the right hadith from the wrong hadith. That's enough for today, inshallah. May Allah accept from all of us. So any points or any questions on mature service?